And welcome back to the first segment of our show this morning. We mentioned prior to the commercial break that we will be embarking upon a conversation this morning that deals with mental health, human rights, and the law. That being said, we have with us on set Mrs. Kathy Esquivel. She's a representative of the Mental Health Association of Belize. Good morning. And we also have Aimee. She's a member of the Mental Health Association of Belize as well. Good morning, ladies.
Hello.
Good morning.
This seems to be such a broad topic, but in the context of recent events over the past few weeks or so, it becomes a relevant discussion for us to have this morning. I know that from a news perspective, we have been covering instances where you have victims who have been afflicted with mental health issues, illness, and we also have accused persons, alleged perpetrators, who are also themselves afflicted with mental health illness. Where does the law and human rights intersect in all of this? Perhaps let's begin there.
Well, maybe I should say first that Aimee is our new president of the Mental Health Association.
Thank you.
It's a pity we don't have a legal expert here because neither of us are legal experts. But it's always difficult, and actually the laws in Belize are totally archaic. And we have been working with Ministry of Health and others for many years because they're stuck in English 1930s laws. So the laws are very archaic, but essentially someone with a mental health issue has the same legal rights unless they have been court ordered. They have the same rights, human rights, as anyone else. So I think that's a starting point.
Yeah.
Well, Ms. Kathy kind of said it. When we look at someone interacting with the law, just because they have a mental illness doesn't mean that they will be treated differently. Where it comes is how they are processed. That's what is necessary, where we come with a little bit more empathy for what they are going through and make sure that we look at the idea that when we treat someone, we treat them as a human being regardless of the issues that they may have. You mentioned mental illness, but in my point of view, substance use is a mental illness as well. So how does that wrap in? How do you talk to someone who has alcohol substance abuse versus someone who has schizophrenia? Pretty much you are dealing with the same issue. It is coming from a mental illness. So when you treat that person from a legal perspective, you're not differentiating. But at the end in the process, how they are treated, they may require more attention. Just like if you have diabetes or if you have a lactose intolerance, if you are in prison, it depends how will you be treated given your special situation.
What's interesting is we've had this conversation before, but from a different perspective. We were talking when persons with mental illness were more the victims.
And that happens.
On the other end of the law, we saw cases of murder, exploitation, and a number of other issues that go unreported. I think what has become the more recent concern is when they're involved in altercations or they become the perpetrators, because there's kind of a gap in being able to understand where do I have understanding for your mental illness, but also keep you accountable for the actions that you've undertaken. How do you help people to process this?
Okay, well, I think it all fits into stigma and discrimination because there have been a few incidents, and I'm not trying to downplay them. But when you look into the scale of violence in society, they're not a major part, but people focus on it because they think, oh, this is something we can do something. This is someone we can blame. This is someone. So I'm not downplaying it. It can occasionally be an issue. But it has to be dealt with like anything else. And when it comes to the law, obviously, if you commit an offense, you have to be charged. Now, how you're treated after that, you know, if you're found not to be responsible for your behavior, it doesn't mean you're going to be let loose. but you have to be treated differently.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with it? Basically, there's no way to tell, but very few people with mental illnesses are actually a danger to other people. The danger is more to themselves. Suicide is very prevalent amongst people because mental illness is so broad. It's depression, it's I think what people are more afraid of is the psychotic illnesses, because it's so hard to understand, because it's an otherness. But we have to be aware, and as a society we have to notice changes. And as Aimee says, if we treat people as human beings rather than that dirty man down the street, we might notice that something is happening.
And one of the things that we have to realize, especially with psychosis, when we have something like a command hallucination, where in your head you hear voices and the voice is telling you kill this person or kill that person, we will go back and say, why wasn't that person on medication? Why wasn't that person being treated? The thing is, as an adult, no one can force you to take medication on a regular basis. No one can force you into treatment. We have put in place things where they can get their treatment through the public system, where the public system, the PNPs and the police will come and administer your medication on a monthly basis. These are things that are out there, but there are people who fall through the cracks. And like Ms. Kathy says, you have to monitor the people around you. So you want to see, there are people with different mental illnesses, with depression, with bipolar disorder, with schizophrenia, who, you know, are normal and integrated part of our society, and they know how to track themselves. Now, the thing is, it's very hard to be continuously on medication. And when you have something like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, it's even more tough as an individual to stay on your medication, because then you have that easier, you're more likely to not stay on track when you have certain kinds of impulsive behaviors and things like that. So when you have that, and you are more likely to have a decline or something like that, then that's when the people around you will see that you are having symptoms and try to get you into treatment before an incident would happen.
Now, how do we help people understand, and you were so right when you said it, you know, there's a wide spectrum of what a mental illness can be. And perhaps it's more important that we do focus on the psychotic related ones, because those are the ones I find that people just have a harder time empathizing or being able to understand. Talk to us about what we know of the situation in Belize, and also just how we can differentiate when we need to intervene in any way.
Well, I think I really have to applaud the Ministry of Health. I wish we had someone from the Ministry of Health here. And internationally, it's recognized that they really, because this is not a problem just in Belize. And too often, if you don't do the right mental health interventions, everything ends up in the criminal justice system, which is not where it belongs. As I say, sometimes, yes, if you've committed an offense, you belong, but most of the time, things should be treated in the health system. And it's the same with drug addiction. You know, it really should be treated as a public health issue rather than a criminal issue, unless you're part of a big time money-making machine. So I think we have to look at things from the public health issue. And we have very well-trained psychiatric nurse practitioners. We have them in every district. It's a fantastic system. They're a very dedicated group. They know their patients. If they don't see them, they go out and find them. But as Aimee said, sometimes people slip through the cracks. And again, if you have a mental health issue, it's quite common that you will have become estranged from your family because it's not the easiest thing for families to deal with. So I think families need help to try and keep in touch and to recognize what is going on. Like there have been cases that I remember where one of the younger people attacked an older family member. And the family said, well, he was always odd, you know, but yes, he was always odd. He was obviously mentally ill, but nobody did anything about it until the attack occurred. So I'm not saying it's easy for family members, but really family is the first bulwark.
This is just an observation. It's not grounded in any fact or anything. What I've noticed is that, as you rightfully mentioned earlier, society has a way of frowning upon persons with mental health issues. And so that if you're looking at it from the point of view of family, there are certain challenges that perhaps the mom or the dad or the siblings don't want to have to deal with if they are going through their own individual thing, so to speak. And so oftentimes the person who is afflicted by a mental health issue is left alone. He has to figure things out by himself, or he has to navigate a world where there really isn't any kind of mercy or empathy for persons who are suffering from this kind of thing. When you look at what systems are in place, I know that there's the Welcome Resource Center, for one. Are there any other kinds of initiatives that reach out to persons who are suffering from mental health issues?
Well, as I said, there's the Ministry of Health that has a very extensive community mental health program. Well, the Welcome Resource Center is only in Belize City because it's a pilot project. Actually, one of our participants we heard died yesterday,
over the weekend,
but of a medical issue. And not everybody wants to go there because, again, it's voluntary. Some families do manage, but as I say, it can be very difficult for families, and sometimes families are so stretched and overstretched trying to deal with all the issues that's just one they can't deal with.
And also because we don't have information, and as Ms. Kathy mentioned, there's a big stigma regarding a lot of these illnesses, and so people, like you said, will just separate from that person rather than understand. And what we come back to, just like the police, just like the criminal justice system, there has to be more empathy and more conversations about these. So if you suspect that a family member has depression, reach out, figure out what depression is. If you suspect that this person is has symptoms of psychosis, look it up, talk about it a little bit, talk to a doctor. I've had people who were referred to me in their 20s who have been hearing voices for years, and it's not something that the family has ever dealt with. I've had people who've been coping with periods of hypomania, and the family doesn't realize, and there's a lot of undiagnosed things because we just tack it up to something different. That person is just weird, that person is just odd, that person just doesn't like dealing with people. So we have a lot of these things that happen in our society that aren't really addressed as mental health issues. Not necessarily that we want to label these people, but the more you can see symptoms, the more services there will be. So
because they can be treated.
Yes. I
and
mean,
for free.
Yes, mental health treatment is free. It's the stigma and discrimination as well. Plus, a lot of people don't understand a lot, and a lot of these symptoms tend to start, especially psychotic symptoms, in the late teens, early 20s. Now, those of us remember our teenage years know that they tend to be crazy, and teenagers can be difficult to deal with, and they're going through so sometimes what happens, the symptoms are oh, he's just going through a phase, you know. So that's part of the problem, that it, and he was such a nice young man, and he never, no, because these issues show up late teenage, early 20s, sometimes even late 20s, but mostly early 20s. And a lot of times they get shoved aside as just being, oh, he's going through a period.
And a lot of people self-medicate with drugs.
Yes.
So people who have anxiety, people who have a lot of depression, they would often use marijuana to just, you know, feel calm and just deal with life like that.
Yeah.
They use alcohol every day. Some people use alcohol in order to interact with people and socialize. And so we self-medicate for a lot of these things that could be happening. Even for signs of psychosis, people will say, well, you know, this drug kind of quiets the voices down. So in order for me to operate, you know, like on a normal level, for me to not do that, then I use this. And that's not the way to do it, because then you're adding extra things. And then we look in our society, we have rampant substance use, and it's normative. It's not like it's considered a bad thing. It's just, you know, we are hanging out, and this is how I socialize, or this is how I get through the day.
Yeah, and I'd suspect too that you'd eventually end up blaming the substance more than the root problem, which is the mental illness.
Yeah.
Now, here's what happens when an issue like this comes back into focus, and I'm sure you've probably heard it already. The public starts saying, why aren't we locking them up? We used to have an institution. Why did they ever remove it? It's safer if we have people who are struggling with their mental illness in an institution. How do you respond to that?
It's safer for whom? It depends. As I said, you can't lock people up proactively. If somebody has not committed an offense, you can't lock them up because they might commit an offense in the future. So what we say is, yes, if someone commits an offense, they have to be dealt with. But you can't lock people up because they might commit an offense.
And also, when we look at it from a mental health perspective, we have this movement of deinstitutionalization. And so we want to make these people a part of our society so that they can become participants in our regular, you know, community. And there is nothing stopping majority of these people, as we see, from interacting in a healthy manner in our society. As a matter of fact, if we look at persons who are violent or cause a crime because of their mental health illness, it is a very small proportion compared to other reasons for crime. So why would we lock up 5% of our community if, for the most part, they can be giving back to the economy, they could be participating as good citizens, and just for the small majority who can, for the most part, function normally with appropriate treatment. That is why the movement of deinstitutionalization happened. That is why we don't have mental health centers like crazy houses, as they used to be called, you know, because these people were found to be healthy and part of the community for the most part. And when they have a trigger, then the treatment becomes more intense, and maybe as a society we need to see how the time off will work. And so that is part of what we have to do. You know, recently burnout was considered as is now a diagnosable disorder. So what is burnout? It's literally just being overwhelmed by too much. And this can happen to normal people. And so if everybody now, we can say, because I'm burnt out, I could get time off. You know, I could get it. It's considered like a mental, considered like a physical disorder,
a health emergency.
Like yes, and so if we can do this, would we put these people up in an institution as well? Because I'm burnt out, I need to go to this mental institution.
Plus, how long is it for? Is it for life? Is it a life sentence? For what? Well, he's dirty and he smells bad, and he asked me for $1 when I pass. And for that, you're going to sentence someone to life in
a facility,
essentially in lockup.
And I think what it highlights is perhaps a part of the unspoken problem, which people can have a disorder or a mental illness, be treated, and function as most of us do as human beings, good days, bad days, in between days. But do they have access to employment? They're on the street for a reason. They're out of their family's home for a reason. What are the supplementary programs that are available?
That's not the vast majority.
Yeah.
I mean, the majority of people with mental issues are actually employed.
Good.
So we're talking about a very small subset, which is the homeless, or essentially homeless.
Yeah.
Maybe they sleep on a veranda or whatever.
Yeah.
So that is a small subset of people who are mentally ill.
Yeah.
That is not the majority. So we have to focus, if that's who we're talking about, okay, well, what can we do? Well, we have to do what we can. The Welcome Center is one way of helping people to have somewhere to go,
During the day.
get a meal, get a change of clothes.
Yeah.
It's not mandatory. But it's not the majority of people. In fact, the majority of people with mental health issues are employed.
Yeah.
You know.
And also we look at this issue of who is going to maintain an institution if that's the route that we're going to go. Maintaining the prison is hard enough. And so, and the prison has certain services for mental health.
Yeah.
And so what will we do with a full-on institution? Who will maintain it if we have trouble with the resource center?
And who will decide who is to go in?
Yeah.
And is there any legal recourse? You know, it's incredibly complex when you start to deal with putting people away if they might do something.
Yeah.
And so that really becomes impossible.
How does mental health and the penal system work? I know you mentioned there's perhaps a program at the Belize Central Prison where persons with...
They actually have a wing, and they have the psychiatrist visits on a monthly basis and supervises medication. And well, there is a doctor at the prison now who has training. He's a general practitioner, but he also has some training, because actually the percentage of people in the prison with mental health issues is very much higher than the percentage in the general population, because they tend to get caught. Whereas maybe some of the other big-time criminals are in their big houses not getting caught. But if you're a low-level criminal, you get caught. If you're a high-level criminal, you don't get caught.
You know, I think we just finished, it was Mental Health Awareness Month last month, right? And we didn't get the opportunity really to talk about it. And I think what this does is kind of set the tone to remind people of why we need to understand the importance of our mental health.
Yeah.
And that they're really, I mean, sometimes when I look at it, there's very little difference between your physical health and your mental health, but it is something that we as a society struggle to be able to understand. How do we, and as Mental Health Association now you can officially work just that, how do we keep the information flow going so that people can begin to make the connections between ourselves and when we're not doing so well mentally?
This is something that, as the Mental Health Association, we are trying to work on a few more outlets.
Yeah.
Most of our focus centers around World Mental Health Day in October.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to spread it out throughout the year. What we find is a lot of the times every month is you know, specialized for something.
Yeah.
And September we have World Suicide Awareness Day on September 10th, which in Belize we will never celebrate it as a standalone day because it's a holiday.
Yeah.
So there are things throughout the year where we do have these conversations come up, and one of the main things we can do is try to always keep it up. One of the things I do is try to go on the media to talk about mental health issues. We always have our Facebook pages as the Welcome Resource Center, the Mental Health Association has, where we try to disseminate. I know several of the people in private practice also have the same. The mental health unit of the Ministry of Health, they do a lot as well. The Belize School Counselor Association, they have several things throughout the year that highlight mental health as well. And so there is a more consistent conversation about mental health on a regular basis. One of the things we did last year was work with the schools, right, Ms. Kathy? And we did a training for administrators where we provided psychological first aid training, and which is something a lot of what we spoke about needs to factor into several other areas of our community where just people are more aware of what mental health is, what mental health concerns are, and how to interact with people who have mental health disorders or concerns. And so we can reach out to them. We have this thing where if you see a change in a person, just reach out to them, see what is going on. It is not your job to do counseling, but it is your job to reach out and help them identify that there are steps that they can take afterwards.
My final question just has to be where people can go for help. So, you know, I recall hearing a few of the stories where people spoke of their loved one who they knew something was wrong with them. If I have a family member like that, I know there's just something that's not right. What do I do?
Well, first of all, you have to talk to your family member.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of private counselors now.
Yeah.
And so that is because a lot of people, because of the fear of discrimination, they want to be private. So there's that option, but the public option is there. All of the health centers have a psychiatric nurse practitioner. So in Belize City, you have the Port Loyola and you have Cleopatra White. And there's counseling. It might not be a psychiatrist. It depends on what is happening. But in every district, the hospital has a psychiatric nurse practitioner. So you can always reach out locally. And in most districts, they don't only deal with the town, they also make visits with the mobile unit. They have people that they visit. So reach out, don't feel ashamed. Just like you don't have to feel ashamed if someone in your family has diabetes. You have to feel concerned, but you don't have to feel ashamed. And I think shame is what sometimes keeps people from reaching out. But we have to recognize that there really is no such thing as physical health and mental health. There's health. And so if there is a health problem, you need to reach out to try and deal with it. I admit that 50 years ago, there really wasn't much to be done for psychosis. But in the 1960s, which is before most people were born, that's when the new medications started to come in. And now they're much better than they were. So there is nothing that is impossible. People can get treatment. They can have a better quality of life.
All right. Thank you for coming in and having this conversation with us this morning.
Thank you
for inviting us.
All right. We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll be getting all the details about the upcoming International Jazz Festival. So stay tuned.